Hey, what is up guys, JTX here. This is going to be my updated 3.27 Bleed Bow League Starter Guide. This is going to be a shorter video. There hasn't been too much that's changed since the previous league with the League Start version of the build. Big difference, this league is going to be starting as a Gladiator rather than a Slayer, and I'll jump into the reasons why in a second. Also talk about the differences between the final endgame version of the Mercenaries build versus the current endgame. The main thing is losing access to a mercenary, so it's going to be a couple of things you have to change to match the power loss there. Also touch on the Bloodline Ascendancies that came out and what could be good for us. Also rune Grafts that are out now that are really good for the build. And also potentially some Foulborn Uniques. Alright, so the main reason why we're going to be starting as a Gladiator this time as opposed to either a Champion or a Slayer mainly is because of the new Bloodline Ascendancy notables. Previously in the past, Gladiators could only have 3 Ascendancy choices, before the last one being kind of useless for Bleed Bow. With this new patch, we can actually take advantage of that by having a 4th Ascendancy go towards either one of the new Bloodline Ascendancies. In this case, the one that I'm eyeing up is the one you get from Pharaoh, so the Animist Pharaoh. There are some pretty powerful buffs that you can get from it, so Wild Will or Fertile Will, both of those could be really strong. Ultimately, you probably do switch into a Slayer in the endgame, or a Champion, depending on what type of path you want to go, either more offensive or more defensive potential. But I'm going to be league starting as a Gladiator this time because of the early access to really powerful nodes, and there really isn't that downside of having that 4th Ascendancy point go to waste. Now, the other main change to the build is because of the removal of Mercenaries, we lose access to some auras that we were running on our Mercenary. Notably, that's going to be Malevolence and Grace. Grace isn't that important for our build because we have a lot of endurance charges and we have a lot of mitigation already with our build. The more important one is going to be Malevolence. So in our previous build, I managed to squeeze in Skitterbots instead of Malevolence that we normally run. This will mean you have to drop your Skitterbot setup because there's just not enough mana to actually fit both of those in the same build. The other big thing this league are going to be the Foulborn Uniques. There are only a couple slots that we can actually use for Foulborn Uniques that are potentially good for us. Foulborn Uniques can't come from boss drops, so that rules out some items that we use in our build, which is like Alessa's and Hands of the High Templar. But the items that we could potentially use are going to be our Ralakesh's Boots and potentially our Usurper's Penance, depending on if we're going for corruption there. Just keep an eye out for any cool unique items that could be synergistic with our build, because we don't know what the mod list is yet and what unique items are actually available. So those are things that to look out for this league in the build. But everything else in terms of gearing is essentially the same. We're still going to be stacking frenzy charges as much as we can going into the end game, prioritizing a really high bow and then crafting a dot quiver, most likely on an ornate base so you can sock it in less with duration for your aspect at the cap, so you can shift between the modes faster, ensuring 100% uptime on your frenzies and endurance charges. In terms of Atlas strategy that I normally like to do on Bleed Bow, I go for Atlas progression on the very first day, and then shift into a Ritual and Beyond strategy to get as much tainted currency as possible and sell that early on. And then eventually I shift into Strongbox tier 17s. Because Breach is also part of the core league mechanic this league, it's going to be really juicy either way for our build. Our build is incredibly good at clearing dense packs of mobs, so Breach is a very good candidate for that. We're going to be popping everything with our split arrow, chains, and explosions, so we'll have a really good time for breaches. Also, with the new breach craft system coming this league, it will be really good to keep an eye out for anything that's physical related to our build, potentially something that could aggravate our bleeds or something that could provide utility for our build, something that kind of takes over the slot of what Frenzy and Rain of Arrows does for our build at the moment. Keep an eye out for something like that. I think it could be really just good for leveling early on, and then you just pure utility later on for our build. We'll have to kind of see what available Grafts there are for our build, or Grafts that are synergistic for our build. As for the actual league mechanic and like the breach tree, I'm probably going to be prioritizing growing uniques really early on, see if I get any cool Foulborn uniques, and then probably currency. Jumping into our PoB now, like always, I'll have a leveling tree from level 1 all the way into your endgame. Also have a little note section here so you know what gems to pick up in which act for the build. This essentially is going to be the same as the previous league. There's been no major changes to our build, so all the previous videos are still relevant. And if you're looking for progression, just have a look at the previous videos. They're going to be very, very similar to what you'll see this league. The only main difference this league is we're going at Gladiator. Our Ascendancy Order will be taking Gratuitous Violence, Jagged Technique, and then finally War of Attrition, with our 4th and final Ascendancy being a Bloodline one, most likely being the Pharaoh one. For other uniques, previously I always suggested getting Hemophilias. That's because we were running as a Slayer or a Champion version of the build and we don't have access to the bleed pops. This time you don't have to go for Hemophilias. They're still a really good pair of gloves. They give bleed chance and a bit more damage on your bleed pops, but not necessary now. So if they're really expensive at the start of the league, don't bother getting them. You don't need them. You can just go for any pair of gloves. Ideally something with maybe max frenzies is good for us, or anything that's useful for the build, but don't feel like you have to go for Hemophilias. Other early game uniques are Duress Defiance, really good for Onslaught and giving us a bunch of speed early on. Rosatha's Coil was really good until we swap into our Maven belt. And mainly prioritizing just upgrading your bow wherever you can and getting a decent quiver. Those would be your main priorities for the build. And then once you want to swap into Frenzy stacking, you're going to be prioritizing your Frenzy Relicash boots. Once you have those, you can pretty much fully swap into the Frenzy stacking version of the build and then aim for your really good Frenzy gear. So we're talking Max Frenzy Synthesis bows, Max Frenzy rings, and that's how you really push the build to the next level. As for my Leaguestart plans, I plan to start as a Gladiator bleed bow. I'm going to push that up and get as much currency as I can early on into maps. And then I'm going to transition my build into a Corrupting Fever champion, potentially, depending on how good the wand changes are. Or I might change it into an armor stacker, it really depends. Both of those builds are something I want to try out and test. I've played the bleed bow archetype to the end game multiple times now. It's incredibly strong. It can farm almost every single tier 17 strategy. As always, thank you guys for watching the video. Always appreciate the comments of people asking for the new bleed bow update each league. Brings a smile to my face that people are always interested in this build archetype. Hopefully you guys have a really good league start. I'm really excited to play this new league. All the new changes look really cool. Really excited to test out a bunch of new things. And as always, I'll catch you guys in the next video.